don't know that we will be able to find and stop the things that might kill people. I don't know that we will be able to find and stop the things that might kill people. Might ask for an additional minute.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Let me go on and conclude with this. We have heard earlier on the floor from the junior senator from Texas who spoke eloquently about the great work being done by the veterans health care system. And it's unfortunate that it took a government shutdown for my colleague, Madam President, if I might say through you, to understand how important a completely government-run health care system is. The VA is completely government-run and funded. And colleagues who are opposing people buying private insurance through private exchanges to make their own decisions about what works for them, who are saying it's the end of the world if families can buy insurance that's more affordable for them and that they can actually get what they're paying for because doctors can't kick them off when they get sick or block them from getting insurance with a pre-existing condition, saying that's awful, but a completely government-run health care system called the VA should be funded. Well, I happen to agree with that. Our system through the VA is important for veterans. We need to keep it funded. We need to keep the CDC, the National Institute of Health, the FDA, and every other part of our important system funded. The House needs to vote. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Indiana.
Thank you, Madam President. First, I'd like to thank the Capitol Hill Police and the Secret Service for their bravery, their heroism, and their work, not only yesterday, but every day, to keep this Capitol safe and to keep the people in it safe. We are in their debt. Madam President, the people of Indiana all want jobs. We want to go to work. We want and we know the dignity that comes with a good day's labor and the chance to take care of our family. And the people in Indiana have told me time after time, and they said it very clearly, Joe, focus on jobs, focus on the basics. I couldn't be prouder of my home state. And every day I'm thankful I have the amazing privilege to represent all Hoosiers in the United States Senate. But our economy in Indiana isn't as strong as we would like it to be. The national unemployment rate is 7.3%. Indiana, 8.1. Indiana's median household income declined 13.2% from 2000 to 2012, and it lags behind the national average. We've dropped to 40th among states in per capita income. We have so much work to do in my home state and in our country. And Madam President, as you know, I am an optimist by nature, but I'm incredibly disheartened by what I've seen in Washington recently. Some in Congress are playing a game of chicken with our jobs, with our economy, with our future. Because these folks haven't gotten their way, thousands of Hoosiers are furloughed and are not receiving paychecks. The paychecks that help them feed their families, pay for college, and invest their hard-earned money in local-run businesses. Many of the good people at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Crane, Indiana, who keep our troops in Afghanistan and around the world safe, they were sent home recently. And they can't do their critical work that keeps our nation safe. The demands of a few here have caused the scientists at the Center for Disease Control to be unable to go to work. These actions have also caused many of the patriots at Fort Wayne's Air National Guard Station and Grissom Air Reserve Base and at Terre Haute to have their work and their operations idled. We are now at a point in the debate where some are putting our economy at risk simply to advance their own political agendas. These folks are shutting down operations across our nation and in my beloved home state, and that hurts our still recovering economy. We have so much work to do to move Indiana and our nation forward, and Congress isn't helping. We talk all the time about providing certainty to our business friends. Hoosier businesses thrive on hard work, creativity, and teamwork. They also deserve a government that provides certainty, a steady hand in choppy seas. They don't need a government that creates the storm. Most folks back home, we think Congress can play some role in improving the economy, even if that role is simply not to make things worse. But over the last year, Congress has made and continues to make things much more difficult. It is embarrassing that the actions of some in Congress these days are now the greatest obstacle to future job creation in our country. Americans' economic confidence is measured daily via polling by Gallup. It's currently at -22. It matches the low for the year. And it's worth pointing out that the other low for the year happened right before sequestration took effect in March. Another problem, another self-inflicted wound caused by Congress. The implementation of sequester cuts, which is what happened when Congress proved itself unable to make the tough decisions that Congress was sent here to make, has led to job losses and furloughs. So many families, they just don't have as much to make ends meet. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office reported we could lose up to 1.6 million jobs next year if these across-the-board cuts continue. Further, a number of economists have concluded that Congress significantly reduced this country's economic growth because we failed to replace the cuts with something smarter. And economic growth is a fancy term for people going to work and people who have jobs. The American people are losing confidence in their economy because of Congress. Here we are, 6 months later, 4 days into a government shutdown, 13 days away from defaulting on our debt. History tells us government shutdowns are terrible for the economy and terrible for jobs. If we look at the last time the federal government shut down, in 1995, 1996, for 27 days, Congress put hundreds of thousands of people out of work, cost over $1 billion in damages, and consumer confidence took a double-digit hit. Back then, our country's economy, though, was in a stronger place than it is today, and it recovered a little bit quicker. This government shutdown is damaging our economy and damaging our economy at a time where it is very, very fragile. However, this government shutdown has damaged our economy, but a default on our bills as we look forward would be absolutely devastating. What happens if we fail to raise the debt limit and if we stop paying our bills? That's what the debt limit is. It's our obligation to pay our bills. While it's completely unprecedented, well-respected economists warn it could send us right back into a tailspin. We're still recovering from the last recession. At a time when Hoosiers are trying to get back to work and take care of our families, Congress' inability to work together is making it so much more difficult. Congress is not helping and is actually hindering job creation and economic growth. Madam President, this is no way to run a country. I stand ready to work with anyone in a common-sense way out of this train wreck. We must find a way to stop hurting the economy and to actually help the people who have made this country such a great place. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Indiana.
Madam President, like my colleague from Indiana, Senator Donnelly, I also want to take a moment before I deliver my remarks here to thank the Capitol Police and all of our law enforcement and first responders that put themselves in the line, on the line to protect others. I know I speak for every Republican and every Democrat and all of our staffs that we deeply appreciate their work and their sacrifice. These brave men and women here every day, whether they're paid or not, and we appreciate that. There's one thing that we're united here, and I wish there were more. It's our respect for those who serve to protect, those serving us here at home as well as those serving us in harm's way abroad. We owe them our support, and we owe them our thanks. Madam President, I'm hearing from a number of Hoosiers, as my colleague has from Indiana. They're tired of political gamesmanship. They're tired of paying taxes to a government that isn't listening or delivering for them. And now we're in a situation where they're tired of our careening toward these cliffs and shutdowns. But when the Republican-controlled House sent over legislation to the Senate, calling for House and Senate leaders to conference together, to sit down in a room, to talk through this problem and come to a solution, this good faith effort was rejected out of hand by the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Reid from Nevada. We were willing to sit down and debate this issue. Once again, yet another good faith effort sent over by Republicans to help fund essential functions of this government, dead on arrival in the United States Senate. The Senate Majority Leader parroting the words of the President, "We will not negotiate." Refusing to allow Republicans and Democrats to try to find a way forward to resolve this issue and get our government up and functioning. Now, in the past, when these things happened, presidents, realizing that they were elected to lead, we're elected to serve here, we're elected to serve the president, we're elected to serve the people that we represent, but the president is elected to serve this country. And when the president, in the past, has come up in a stalemate situation, there's been a reach out to the other side, and whenever you have a divided government. Now, of course, after 2008, the Democrats won control of the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. They had total control, and they pushed through a number of measures without any single Republican or opposition support. Those programs now we're dealing with, Obamacare being the primary one that has brought us to this particular point. The lesson learned here, when one party has total control, without support from the opposition party, you end up with a legislation that is dysfunctional, that doesn't work, that reflects the ideology of one party. It doesn't have any balance to it. We're now in a position where we have a divided government, and what we would like is to have some say on how this goes forward, to point out those things of this bill that are not working, to point out the disaster that this is turning out to be, the dysfunction of this particular legislation. But the point I'm trying to make here is that whatever the issue, whenever we come to a stalemate, historically, throughout the history of this country, it is the Commander-in-Chief, it is the President who has stepped forward and taken the initiative and said, we need to work together to solve this. We can't impose our will on the body that is the American people has divided, giving control of one house to one party and control of the other house to another party. And so Ronald Reagan reached out to Tip O'Neill, and some very significant measures, stalemates, were resolved because the President reached out and was willing to negotiate. Democrat President Bill Clinton reached out to a then Republican Speaker of the House in the 90s, and we addressed a major, major issue with welfare reform, a much-needed welfare reform. It couldn't have happened without the President reaching out. And so here and I could give other examples, but here we are, another stalemate situation. And yet, what do we hear? No matter what Republicans send over, no matter what the offer is, if the offer is to let's sit down and conference this, the reaction from the Senate Majority Leader is we refuse to negotiate. The reaction from the White House and this President over and over and over and over again is I will not negotiate. Even though the American public sent you control of one house of Congress, even though the Constitution establishes the roles of the Congress vis-a-vis the President and calls for an agreement between the two before we can move forward, this President, for whatever motive, says, I will not negotiate. We can do something right now to help Americans. We can come together and fund important programs and departments that should not have been jeopardized because of this impasse. We can at least do that. If we can't get the President to negotiate, can we not at least take some steps forward for those essential functions of government? Now, Republicans have sent over 9 such propositions and proposals. Each one of them has been rejected dead on arrival, not even allowed to debate, procedurally stopped by the Majority Leader. But let me suggest 4 that are waiting in the wings. And surely, for reasons of health and safety of Americans, surely we can agree to support these 4, and perhaps more. Some others have been suggested. Surely you have to conclude that this is an essential function. How it was that they were declared non-essential is beyond me. But let me mention these 4 that go to honoring our veterans and the commitments that we have made to them, and go to providing for our national security and protecting Americans' health. I spoke earlier this week on the Honoring Our Promise to American Veterans Act, a bill providing funding for disability payments, the GI Bill, education training, and VA home loans under the same conditions that were in place last year. The House passed this, but the Senate Majority Leader has blocked it here. The House also passed the Pay Our Guard and Reserve Act. This bill provides funding for the pay and allowances of military personnel in the reserve component and National Guard component who are scheduled to report for duty as early as this weekend. Denying support for that, for them who wear the uniform and stand ready and have engaged when called on and have been trained to do so. Denying that is a great disservice to the men and women who've dedicated so much and put themselves at great risk to wear the uniform of the United States. Secondly, funding the Department of Homeland Security. There are a number of ways our Homeland Security is impacted under the shutdown. One of the impacts on FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is the need to be funded so that they are prepared to respond to natural disasters. We're only a breaking news headlines away from another natural disaster or some other need for FEMA to engage. And yet their employees are furloughed and not in place to be ready to respond. We've got a tropical storm in the Gulf right now. It may turn into something dangerous. Our emergency response efforts to provide for homeland support is inadequately funded. Can we not at least do that? How about funding for our intelligence community? The House will send us Preserving Our Intelligence Capabilities Act, which will provide immediate funding for personnel compensation and contracts for those individuals that have been determined by the Director of National Intelligence as necessary to support critical intelligence activities and counterterrorism efforts. Under the current shutdown, 70% of our civilian employees in our intelligence community have been sent home on furlough. Director of National Intelligence Clapper said that this lapse in funding our intelligence agency is a dreamland for our foreign intelligence adversaries. Can we not at least, if we have a delay in resolving our issues here, and we have that delay, as I said, because the Senate Majority Leader has not allowed us to sit down and work, I would ask unanimous consent for an additional 3 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President, I thank you. Can we not at least fund those agencies that are looking to protect us from terrorist acts, that are in place to keep the American people safe? How can we reject that? Finally, let me mention a fourth, and there are others, but let me mention a fourth. Fund the food and drug safety programs. Safety programs. Those who are in need of approvals for new drugs and new devices that are experiencing significant delays because the federal employees at FDA that review these functions can't report to work. Now, Madam President, frankly, I'm perplexed why the Majority Leader continues to oppose even consideration and debate for individual funding bills when they just agreed a couple days ago to funding our troops. But and I applaud that and support that. But if we did that because of the essential nature of their function, shouldn't we also include these other items? Shouldn't we agree that we need to fulfill our commitments to Guard, Reserve, our intelligence community at this critical time? The House has already sent over 9 proposals to the Senate for consideration. 9. 9 times the Senate has had the opportunity to pass legislation to reopen our government and fund essential programs. But the Senate Majority Leader chose not to, and the President refuses to even engage. Government shutdown is a pox on all of our houses. We need to do what the people of this great country elected us to do, and that is to work to find a solution to the government shutdown. We cannot do that if the Democrat chair at the negotiating table is empty. What we're looking at here is a Clint Eastwood moment. We're looking at an empty chair. Mr. President, where are you? With that, I yield the floor.
The senator from Delaware.
I want to thank the senator from Indiana for invoking the name of one of my favorite actors and directors. I did not think that was his finest moment. I'm not talking Senator Coates, but our friend Clint Eastwood, I didn't think his appearance at the Republican National Convention was his finest moment, but it is what it is. It's nice to be with you, nice to follow you on the floor. I think we're left up, Madam President, to Senator from Indiana, and this senator, our colleagues here from North Dakota and Rhode Island, I think we could probably work out a pretty good budget deal in a fairly short period of time that raises some revenues through tax reform to reduce the deficit, and reforms the entitlement programs to save money, save the programs for the long haul, and to make sure we don't savage old people and poor people. And while we're doing that, probably to change the culture of the federal government a little bit so that we focus even more on not a culture of spendthrift, but a culture of thrift. Those are the things we need to do. And I'm always happy to be with him, happy to follow him. So nice to be with you. Let me say, Madam President, maybe following up on what Senator Coates has been saying, I want to it reminds me of a phone conversation I had with a Delawarean today, and she asked me, like, why don't we all just agree to what the Republicans are proposing and adopt a couple of bills or amendments to fund some piece of the government, but not many. And I said, let's just go back a little bit in time. And what I sought to do in that conversation, Madam President, was to explain in pretty simple, straightforward terms how the budget process works here, how the budget process works here, and where it's gone awry. We've had a budget law since, I think, about 1974, and it calls for, or the expectation from the Budget Act is that the President, usually January, February of every year, will give a budget address. This is what the President, his administration, her administration thinks we ought to do. in terms of revenues, in terms of spending, what our priorities should be. The expectation in the law is that this body, the Senate and the House down the hall here, that we'll agree on a budget resolution sometime by, let's say, late April of the year, again for a budget starting October 1 that same year. For a number of years, about 4 years, we didn't do our jobs in terms of developing a budget resolution. It was difficult dividing Congress. It's difficult to do that. And for several years, we didn't. Republicans criticized us harshly for not having passed a budget. What they're talking about was a budget resolution. There's a difference between a budget and a budget resolution. In my home state of Delaware, we actually have 3 budgets. Operating budget for the state of Delaware, capital budget for the state of Delaware, and something called grant and aid, which is stuff that the legislature cares a lot about. It's only a couple percentage of all of our revenues, but there are actually three budgets. Here we have one, and it's a unified budget with capital and operating expenses thrown in together. But before, there's no real direct corollary between what we do here and what we do in most of our states. Most states have an operating budget and a capital budget. Here we have a budget resolution. And the budget resolution is not a nitty-gritty line-item budget. What it does is it sets a framework for what is to follow the appropriations bill, roughly a dozen of them, and what we do on the revenue side through the work of the Finance Committee here and the Ways and Means Committee in the House. The budget resolution says, well, this is roughly how much we're going to spend in these general areas, and this is roughly how much revenue we're going to raise from these general sources. That's the budget resolution. It's, if you will, it's a framework. I call it the skeleton. It's like a skeleton. And later on, we have to come along and put the meat on the bones. And the budget resolution is supposed to be adopted here by the end of April. And usually the Senate will adopt one version, our version. The House will adopt another version. We did that this year by the end of April, as I recall. And they were different. We, in our budget resolution, we did deficit reduction. Didn't balance the budget over the next several years, but we continued to reduce the deficit. Remember, 4 years ago, the deficit peaked out at $1.4 trillion. $1.4 trillion. This last year that just concluded, we had cut it by more than half, as I understand, and we expect it'll be brought down again further this year. Should we do better? Do we need to do better? Sure, we do. And the budget resolution that we passed here took a 50-50 approach. Half of the deficit reduction for the next 10 years would be on the spending side, half would be on the revenue side. The budget resolution adopted over in the House of Representatives did, as I recall, nothing on the revenue side, nothing on the defense side, as I recall, and basically took the savings out of, for the most part, out of domestic discretionary spending, which is you set aside entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, set aside defense, set aside interest payments, the whole rest of the budget. Everything from agriculture to transportation, everything else. That's where they took their savings. And they reduced that part of the budget from about 15% of all federal spending down to something closer to 5%. That's not my vision of what government should be about. Anyway, we came to the end of April. Senate and House passed different budget resolutions, and there was an effort here to go to conference, to create a conference committee, and for us to send conferees, for people who might be watching this and say, what is he talking about? A conference committee is like a compromise committee. Some members of the House, some members of the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, go to this committee that we create for just a short period of time to hammer out a compromise. And in order to be able to do that, somebody has to come to the floor. Usually the leader here comes to the floor and says, well, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate appoint conferees, Democrats and Republicans, to help create this conference committee to work out a compromise. It was objected to. And it's been objected to again and again and again, whether the person making the unanimous consent to go to conference to work out this budget compromise has been made by Democrats and Republicans, at least one Republican. I think Senator Murray has made the request. She chairs the Budget Committee. She's made the request, I think, close to 20 times. And I think John McCain, Republican, presidential candidate a couple of years ago, longtime friend and colleague, he's made the request, I think, close to 10 times. Because he wants to go to a conference. He wants to solve the problem. So do I, and I think, really, so do most of us. And the way to do it is those things that I talked about. Entitlement reform that saves these programs, saves some money, doesn't savage old people or poor people. Tax reform that generates, among other things, some revenues that can be used for deficit reduction. And then just to focus on everything we do and say, how do we get a better result for less money in everything that we do? Well, long story short, here we are. It's not the 1st of May. It's not the 1st of June. It's not the 1st of July. Not the 1st of August or September. It's the first part of October. We've yet to be able to get the unanimous consent to form that conference committee to work out a compromise on the budget. That's where we've fallen short. That's where we've fallen short. And we hear a lot about obstruction. The Speaker, or rather the Majority Leader won't, or the President won't let us go, or work with the Republicans on his piecemeal approaches. You know, for everybody here, Dan Coates, and I love Dan Coates, but for everybody here in the Senate, we could all come up with our list of 4. We could come up with a list of 14 priorities. And you multiply that by 100, that would be 1,400 priorities. It ought to be in all these piecework, piecemeal changes that we're going to make to the spending for the next couple of weeks, next couple of months. Why don't we just do this? Why don't we agree to what the Speaker in the House agreed to, and that is a spending level for a short period of time. A continuing resolution is a spending plan for a short period of time, not for the whole year. In this case, I think we've been talking about a continuing resolution, short-term spending bill that runs about 45 days until maybe the middle of November. The level of that spending, we can argue about that, but what we ended up doing is saying, Harry Reid, our leader, talking to John Boehner, the Speaker of the House, who has a tough job. None of these jobs are easy. They have really tough jobs. But our leaders said to the Speaker, what would be a level of spending for those 45 days or 60 days for the short-term spending bill? What level of spending works for you? And my understanding is that the Speaker vetted that with his folks over there, and they came back and said, how about using the level of spending that we're at for the last fiscal year, for 2013, and to fund for those 45 days or 60 days, whatever's covered by the continuing resolution, fund it for that period of time at that level. Now, that's not our level. Democratic level, to be honest with you, is not $986 billion, which was last year's spending for discretionary spending. We're more interested in something like, I want to say about not 986 billion, about 1.05, something like that, in trillion dollars. It's about another $70 billion. Well, that was our number. The House had their number. We agreed to the House number. We agreed to the House number, and said, okay, we've agreed on the number. Now let's just figure out how long we're going to fund the government at that level, same level as last year. And then the ship ran aground. And our friends over in the House said, that's not enough. We also want to defund Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And now this is an act. It's not like a proposed bill. This is a law. I was here when we debated it, in the Finance Committee when we debated it, amended it, argued it, reported it out, here when we voted on it, there when the President signed it into law. It's a law. The President ran for re-election on this. He was re-elected. Not a landslide. We pretend like it was a landslide re-election. The electoral vote was pretty big, but it was a reasonably close election. But he won, and he won fair and square. And when you looked at the Electoral College, he won by quite a bit. This has been litigated in the courts. The Supreme Court has looked at the one area which they thought some people think is unconstitutional, and that's the idea you have a so-called individual mandate. They said, no, that's constitutional. Where do we get the idea? We got it from Massachusetts. And who was the governor that signed the Massachusetts law into effect? The Republican presidential nominee, who then turned around and ran away from his own idea in the presidential election last year. I think there's some irony to that. And on October 1st of this week, what happened? Well, I think some good news happened. And the good news is that there's 40 million people in our country who don't have health care, had a chance to sign up for something new and different. And it's not socialism, it's not communism, it's not government-run health care. It's a Republican idea. It's called the exchange. It's called the health marketplace. And my understanding is when Hillary Care was kind of discarded back in the early part of the Clinton administration, the Republican counter-proposal to Hillary Care was something like a large purchasing pool, which we call the option, the health care exchange rather, we call the marketplace today. Well, on October 1st, all over the country, people in this nation, 40 million people who don't have health care coverage, had a chance to start signing up for that health care in a large purchasing pool in their state with a variety of options, health insurance companies competing with each other, driving down costs, large number of people. In my state, tens of thousands of people. Other states, big states like Wisconsin, probably hundreds of thousands of people. Other big states like North Dakota, well, tens of thousands of people. But states like New York and California, millions, literally millions of people who don't have health care coverage have a chance to sign up for it there and take advantage of competition, driving down price competition among insurers, and also taking advantage of economies of scale, driving down administrative costs as a percentage of premiums. If you and I went out on our own to buy health insurance in Delaware for, we'll say, our families or for maybe a small business with 5 employees, we would pay a whole lot more money than folks are going to pay in these exchanges and these large purchasing pools. Because for one thing, the administrative costs are so high when you go out and buy it for yourself or a small business. When you're buying health insurance with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people, the administrative costs are much low. Competitive forces bring down the prices as well. Well, our friends in the other party, they want to pull the plug on the efforts of 40 million people to find health care coverage for themselves. Want to pull the plug. And I just think that's wrong. I think it's the law of the land, it's a done deal, it's litigated, it's going to be with us. And I think for some of our Republican friends, they're not afraid that it's not going to work. I think really maybe their greater concern is it's going to work. And it's going to actually meet the needs of people. Abraham Lincoln used to talk, when he would talk about the role of government, he would say the role of government is to do for people what they cannot do for themselves. The role of government is to do for the people what they cannot do for themselves. The Chambers of Commerce in Sussex County in southern Delaware, rural Sussex County, they tried to set up a purchasing pool. Couldn't do it. Tried it 10 years ago. It foundered. And this is something where another guy, David Osborne, in a book called Reinventing Government, he described the role of government. He said, the role of government is to steer the boat, not row the boat. And the exchanges are really that. It's the idea to create large purchasing pools, partnership between state and federal government in many cases in Delaware and others, but to then let the private sector do its job, And these are really a great example of government, its role, steering the boat, private sector and other providers, not rowing the boat. I want to close with this. For people who say, well, we ought to change Obamacare, we ought to change the Affordable Care Act, we ought to make significant changes to it. Well, I agree. And the President already made one big change, one big give, a month or so ago when he announced that the employer mandate was going to be delayed for a whole year to give us a chance to stand up the exchanges, see how they work, make sure they were working, and then to revisit this issue of the employer mandate. The coverage, if you got more than 50 employees, actually a year from now it'll be more than 100 employees, I think, where they have to cover them. I think that's the way it works, but at least more than 50. But and some people say, well, got to change it right now. I want to go back with me in time 6, 7, 8 years. We debated in this floor the issue of prescription drugs. Prescription drugs. Should we have a prescription drug program for Medicare? Most people thought, yeah, we should have that. If when we created Medicare in 1965, if we could have done as much then with prescription medicines, pharmaceuticals, as we can do now, it would have been a no-brainer. But prescription drug coverage would have been part of Medicare from its inception. Well, it wasn't in 1965. And it wasn't until probably about 2005 that we actually got to a place where we had some agreement that this is what we ought to do. Ted Kennedy, the Democrats, had one idea how to do it, and some of our Republican friends, certainly President Bush, had another idea. And you know what we ended up doing? Sort of a hybrid, really a little more like President Bush's idea, George W. Bush. And a lot of our Democrats objected. But you know what? They didn't say we're going to shut down government because we didn't get our way, because we didn't get our specific prescription drug program. They said, why don't we figure out how we can make it better? And we took this, everybody's heard of the donut hole, most everybody's heard of the donut hole with respect to the Medicare prescription drug program. And if the way the original program worked, first $3,000 of pharmaceuticals that a person in Medicare Part D, prescription drug program, that they used, Medicare paid about 75% of the cost. For most people, if anybody used over $6,000 in prescription medicines in a year, Medicare paid about 95% of the cost, everything over $6,000. But roughly between $3,000 and $6,000 when the program was introduced, and for its first half dozen or so years, if you're between $3,000 and $6,000 roughly in prescription medicine purchases in a year, and you're in Medicare prescription drug program, you got nothing for Medicare. It was all on you. That's called the donut hole. Well, when we did the Affordable Care Act, guess what we did? Our friends from Rhode Island, our friends from North Dakota, they know. What we did was we started filling the donut hole. And now, if you happen to be in that gap between $3,000 and $6,000, guess what? Medicare pays over half. And eventually Medicare will pay 75% of that. That's a way we took a good program, Medicare Part D, prescription drug, and we made it better. And we can do that with the Affordable Care Act, and we will. For our Republican friends, let me close with this just to say, our friend Winston Churchill once had a great quote. He had a bunch of them. One of my favorites, I'll close with this. He used to say, you could always count on Americans to do the right thing in the end after trying everything else. That's what he said. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing in the end after trying everything else. Well, this is a tough time. I feel bad, especially for those in our federal employees across the country who have been furloughed. We're going to bring you back. We're going to bring you back, I hope, this month. And my hope is that, and belief is that we'll bring you back, and we'll bring you back with making sure that you're made financially whole. And I think that's the right and fair thing to do. And I just say to my Republican colleagues, the next time, whether it's John McCain or Patty Murray or somebody else who asks unanimous consent to go to conference and work out a real budget agreement, don't object. Let's accept that and get on with the work that lies ahead. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Madam President,
The senator from North Dakota.
yesterday was a scary day on Capitol Hill. I was sitting in your chair, saw the bells ring. This is a new experience for me. Saw all the Capitol Police hustle our great pages in to protect them. And Senator McCain was speaking, and like the veteran that he is, he continued to make his impassioned plea for help for the Syrian opposition as things swirled around. You know, I think for members of our staff and members of the Senate and the House and all the tourists and the visitors, the only thing that stood at that moment between them and potential harm was the Capitol Police and the Secret Service. And I was struck by that. And as a former Attorney General who actually ran a law enforcement agency, I have a lot of great relationships with law enforcement people. In fact, I lost 2 officers in the line of duty during my tenure as Attorney General. And I know the sacrifices. And I know the fears of the families. And I know that every day, regardless of what's going on, some average, ordinary, beautiful day can turn into a catastrophe where an officer loses their lives. And as we were standing there, I was visiting with one of the officers who was protecting the pages, and she told me a story. She told me a story about a uniformed officer, Capitol Police, who told her that morning that he has a stay-at-home wife, and she's raising their children, and he has $115 in his checking account and doesn't know how he's going to get through this time period to the next paycheck. Because even though they're here, and some of them are working overtime, they are here without a paycheck and potentially might not receive a paycheck. And so today we wear these buttons saying thank you. And I think about the hypocrisy of that. Think about the hypocrisy of buttons and galas and ribbons and all of that. And I want to say, you know, it is time for the United States Congress to not just pass out buttons saying thank you, but pass out paychecks. That matters more. That's a real thank you. That's a real recognition of the value of those services. And so it was with great outrage that I left this body last night as we were working through the challenges. And I realized the great humor of the Capitol Police. I was leaving the building and visiting with my guys at the door, and he was giving me a hard time, and I said, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here every day. I want to thank you for your sacrifice. I want to thank you for the trauma that your family goes through. And he goes, yeah, just think how good I'd be if you actually paid me. And so I want to say to all of my friends in the Capitol Police who have been really, truly friends, and some days I feel like the only friendly face I see, that we care deeply, but it's not enough to wear a button. We have got to start solving the problem of this impasse. We have got to start recognizing that all of our people, all of our employees in the federal government, I mean, you know, you have heard all day here this laundry list of let's do this and let's do this, and I think we're up to 9, 10, and they're building, they're growing, each one of these lists, and it should be at some point when we get to the tipping point where we realize all of the functions are important. Everybody who's out there is working is important, is essential. And that the best way forward is to fund government. Now, I want to build on what Senator Carper has been talking about, because I think it's so important. Probably was sitting in the chair the first time this happened, and most of you know I'm new to the Senate, new to these procedures. And Senator Murray, who's chair of the Budget Committee, came out and she asked to appoint a budget conference committee. I knew this process fairly well. You know, we get the big targets and then they get passed down to the appropriators who then build the budget within those guidelines. And Senator from Texas stood up and objected. And I thought, why would you object to the appointment of a conference committee with the House and with Representative Ryan, who has been a staunch conservative and a staunch proponent of targets that I would think that the senator from Texas agreed to. And there was this long back and forth, and Senator Murray sat down, and that was the end of it. And I was perplexed. I thought, well, when do we get to vote on this conference committee? When do we get to, you know, kind of tell her it's okay? Because I doubt there's a whole lot of people in this place who agree that we shouldn't go to conference. Only to find out there's something called unanimous consent. And the same people who have brought us to the brink of triggering a result of a slowdown in our economy with this behavior also have stopped the compromise. And now, adding to the hypocrisy of the day, we have the same claim for let's compromise. The easy compromise here is when Senator Murray comes to the floor and asks for a conference committee, we all agree to start doing it. We all agree to start doing our job. And there's been a lot of attention to the so-called Tea Party shutdown and the Tea Party faction and, you know, calling them out and saying, you know, you're a minority. But I want to take a different tactic this afternoon, and I want to challenge the good people in the House caucus, Republican caucus, who have already recognized that the best thing to do would be to pass a clean CR. And I want to say, I know what it's like to take a tough vote that your party doesn't agree with. I know what it's like to feel like you've let people down who are part of a group that is helping and moving things along and that represents kind of your team to some degree. I know what that's like. I've been there, and I know that it doesn't feel well. But I know that at the end of the day, doing the right thing for what you believe your state believes in is a better feeling. And so I'm just suggesting that maybe the minority of the majority that has an opportunity to step forward and to take on this challenge and do the right thing are those folks who know this is wrong. Those folks who know over there that we could do better, that we have an opportunity to end this nonsense and move forward. There is a procedure for doing this, as I understand it. And so I really want to just speak to those folks who I think are good-hearted, who understand the impact of this on families, on children, on our Native Americans. I could tell you terror stories. Right now we're looking at a snowstorm in North Dakota, and many of our Native families rely on fuel assistance, and the people who do that aren't at the job. And so how are they going to heat their houses in the middle of this snowstorm? This is life and death. And I don't see a special provision coming across for those folks. And that's the problem when you piecemeal this. And I think there's good people in the House Republican caucus who know that. And if there is a way that they can, in fact, step forward, there won't be a lot of glory in their caucus. Trust me, I know. There won't be a lot of pats on the back, and it might be pretty chilly for a long time. But you will have your conscience clear, knowing that you did the right thing. And so I am hopeful that we can get good people to step forward, to stand up to behavior that can only be described in some ways as, so it's been talked about as hostage-taking here. It's really bullying behavior when the small minority does this. And so let's step forward. Let's do the right thing. I challenge you to do the right thing on behalf of the Native Americans, on behalf of my sheriff from Fargo who is sent home, from Quantico, the premier training facility and waited years and years to be in the queue to get that training and now has been sent home. On behalf of law enforcement and on behalf of the Capitol Police, that where we, yes, honor them today by burying these buttons, let's honor them more by passing out paychecks. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I'd like to join my former Attorney General colleague, Senator Heitkamp, in expressing all of our appreciation for what the Capitol Police did. We all know that when that event transpired, our job was to go and hunker down, to stay away from windows where we might be a target, to keep out of the way, and to not add to the difficulty or the confusion. They had a much tougher job. Their job was to go to the danger and to keep the United States Capitol safe. And they did their duty, and they did it well, and it's now incumbent upon us to do our duty, and that is to get rid of the Tea Party shutdown. We are now in Tea Party shutdown day 4, and I have been watching this debate as it's transpired on the floor, and I've been participating a little bit in it, and I've heard some interesting comments that have been made out here. The first one is the suggestion this is not a Tea Party shutdown. They say it's not a Tea Party shutdown, but the Tea Party warned of it. The Tea Party wanted it. The Tea Party is cheering it. And the Tea Party says they're profiting from it, that it's a big success. When did the Tea Party warn of it? Well, one example is when Lynn Westmoreland, a Republican from Georgia, long before this all began, told the Faith and Freedom Coalition, I quote, "This is what we're going to do. If the government shuts down, we want you with us." The Tea Party wanted it. Joe Walsh, Republican of Illinois, most people in my district say, shut it down. Representative Jack Kingston told reporters that his Georgia constituents would rather have a shutdown than Obamacare. Representative Tim Huelskamp said, if you say government is going to shut down, my constituents say, okay, which part can we shut down? The Tea Party not only warned of it and wanted it, but they're cheering it. Michelle Bachmann, Republican of Minnesota, said this, we're very excited. It's exactly what we wanted, and we got it. She pointed out in another quote, this is about the happiest I've seen members in a long time. How happy are the Tea Partiers about the Tea Party shutdown? Well, here's what Republican Representative Devin Nunes said, and I quote, they're all giddy about it. They're all giddy about it. Well, dictionary definitions of giddy say feeling or showing great happiness and joy, joyfully elated, euphoric. Now, giddy also means lightheartedly silly or dizzy and disoriented, but that's another story. Elated, giddy, exactly what we wanted. And now they say that they're profiting from it. Here's GOP cheerleader John Tamny in Forbes magazine. Again, I'm quoting, Republican politicians and members of the party should cheer. Should cheer. The Republican Party decision to allow a shutdown of the federal government, and get this, and to ideally allow it to remain shut through the 2014 elections is good politics. Say that again. Republican politicians and members of the party should cheer the Republican Party decision to allow a shutdown of the federal government and to ideally allow it to remain shut through the 2014 elections is good politics. And echoing that sentiment, we had our colleague Senator Rand Paul the other day say, "We're going to win this, I think." So the Tea Party warned of the Tea Party shutdown. The Tea Party wanted the Tea Party shutdown. The Tea Party is cheering the Tea Party shutdown. They're so happy that they're giddy. And they're claiming that their Tea Party shutdown is a big success. It's a little late now to say, well, it's really not our Tea Party shutdown. I've also heard colleagues come to the floor and say that nothing that they're doing is extremist. It's not extremist to shut down the government and make the demands that they're making. Well, one dictionary definition for extremist is one who advocates or resorts to measures beyond the norm, especially in politics. Well, I'd say that shutting down the United States government is beyond the norm, even in politics. I'd say refusing to ever allow a vote on a Senate-passed bill under the constitutional procedures that prevail between our houses is beyond the norm. And I would say that deliberately putting hundreds of thousands of people who serve our country out of work is beyond the norm. The norm would be for them to vote on our Senate bill over in the House. Over and over, we in the Senate have voted on their House measures. We voted to strip out the extraneous measure and send the continuing resolution back. We voted to table. We followed the Constitution, we've done our duty, and we have voted. They may not like in the House that they didn't win the Senate vote, but we did our duty in the Senate and have repeatedly voted on House measures. Over in the House, they have not yet once voted on the Senate measure. It is sitting on the Speaker's desk without ever a single vote. If the Speaker just called up the Senate measure and allowed a vote over there in the House, it would pass, and the Tea Party shutdown would be over. But remember, who wants this shutdown in order to use it for bargaining leverage? Well, the giddy folks, the folks who are so happy that they have caused this, the folks who think that this is good politics. So I think it's safe to say that they are extremists, both by the dictionary definition and in their disregard of our traditional back and forth, one House voting on the other House's measure. Last, and this one is particularly rich, they say that we won't negotiate. Let's remember that this all began with a deal negotiated between the Speaker and the Majority Leader, that we'd pass a clean, continuing resolution funding the government. What did the Speaker get out of that deal? We agreed to fund the government at the Speaker's level. He actually won that negotiation. That was what was negotiated. But the Speaker did not honor the deal. So as I say, it's rich that we negotiate, we give the Speaker the funding level that he wants, then he breaks the deal, and now claims that we won't negotiate. One of my colleagues came to the floor a little while ago and he called to mind the radio commentator Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey used to have his catchphrase in his radio broadcast be, and now for the rest of the story. And he talked about the rest of the story. Well, the President has made his position very clear. It is, we will not negotiate while you're holding hostages. Open the government, and we can negotiate about anything and everything. but we will not negotiate while you're holding hostages. All the Republicans report in this chamber is the first part. We will not negotiate. Well, it's not just a question of the rest of the story. How about the rest of the sentence? We will not negotiate while you're holding hostages. Let's remember that 19 times we have tried to appoint conferees to negotiate a budget between the Senate and the House. And every time, the Tea Party extremists have stopped us. Let's remember that they don't want to negotiate. They want to negotiate with hostages. That is a very different thing. They want to negotiate with hostages, hundreds of thousands of people who serve our country, whom they are using as hostages and won't let go back to work and earn their living. That's not just negotiation. There's something more than just negotiation going on when it involves hostages or other threats. Every mom whose 4-year-old is having a tantrum over not getting what they want knows that that's not just negotiation. Every 12-year-old picked on by the school bully in the playground knows that that's not just negotiation. And every businessman who's asked to pay protection money knows that that's just not negotiation. There's something else going on. Ordinary Americans get the difference between negotiating in good faith, the way we'd have to if we appointed conferees and went to have an actual conference between the House and the Senate about our budget, the way the rules of the Constitution propose, and negotiating with a threat or negotiating while holding hostages. We are not going to negotiate while you're holding hostages. There are two parts to that sentence. May I have 1 minute to conclude? I see that Senator Portman has arrived.
Without objection.